Welcome back to the Glow Up Girl podcast. I'm Kyra. All right, I am excited to welcome Shana into the podcast. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kyra.
Yes. All right. So, why don't we start by having you tell the audience listening or watching who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Shana Francesca. I am a scholar of intentional and ethical leadership and living, a keynote speaker, and a consultant. And so basically, I teach people what is it to be an intentional and ethical human and an intentional and ethical leader. And both those things are deeply related to relationship.
All right, awesome. Well, this definitely is going to be a fantastic conversation. So, why don't we start? So, let's start with the meaning of your company. So, your
Yeah,
company name is Consonate.
it
And
is.
so, can you please tell everybody listening what does that mean and how did you come up with that?
Yeah, I normally try to read off the exact definition, but I'm going to just shoot from the hip and try to remember it today. But essentially it means to create something and to create it as precisely appropriate, right?
Mhm,
To create a harmonious balance. And it is to do something intentionally, to
mhm,
have it to be well designed, which is in perfect alignment with what I do.
mhm. I love that. So, speaking of, so for let's take it back a little bit in time. You
Yeah,
started as an interior designer
yeah,
and then transitioned to a scholar. I love this, a scholar of intentional and ethical leadership and living.
yeah.
So, what brought that transition on for you, Shayna?
Yeah, so if we just take a step back at, how I grew up, right? So I
Okay.
was born into an abusive household and raised inside of an evangelical Christian cult. And so from my earliest recollection, I was growing up in this extremely high control environment,
Mhm,
in which I was not allowed to be myself. I wasn't allowed to even explore what that meant, right? I wasn't allowed to be curious because curiosity is in direct opposition of systems of oppression.
mhm,
And so to have a healthy whole relationship with myself and my physical environment was not something that I was allowed or given access to. And so when I was deciding who I wanted to be in the world and how I wanted to show up while I was still inside of those high control environments, I had to pick something that
mhm,
aligned with gender binary, right?
mhm,
But still allowed me access to the outside world because I was being told that I had to go to a high control religious school
mhm, mhm.
or college. And I said, absolutely not. um, I was trying to spread my wings. I was trying to gain access to the outside world. I was trying to understand who I might want to be in the world. And so I thought, okay, if I go for interior design, none of these high control religious institutions have that within any,
Mhm.
you know, short geographical area, short distance. And so, especially not accredited. And I didn't know of any that were accredited across the country for interior design. I said, that's perfect. I love to help empower people to create authentic environments that reflect who they are back to themselves, right? Because when we think about it, our physical environment is a reflection of our beliefs about ourselves,
Mhm.
right? It also can function as a vision board for our life, right? You know, or like the stage from which we tell the story of our life, not in a
Right.
performative way, right?
Mhm.
Definitely not in a performative way, but in the way that we sit down and we ask ourselves, and this is what I would do with all my clients, sit down and ask them, who are you? How
Mhm.
do you want to show up in the world? How do you want to create community and connection and relationship around yourself? What do you see that looking like now and in the future? Are you starting a business? Is that business going to be housed within your
Mhm.
home? Is it a separate location? Are we working on your business, or are we working on a restaurant, or are we working on your home, right? And those questions shift depending on what kind of space we're creating, but really fundamentally, they just come back to how do you want to build a relationship between yourself,
Mhm.
people, and living world and this space. And I would be able to craft these beautiful spaces, but I started to recognize there was so much power, right?
Mhm.
And yes, there was so much power in creating physical environments that authentically reflected my clients.
Right.
There was something even more powerful about the conversation. And at the time, I was already, had been for since I was 29, researching leadership, right? Because I was just fascinated. Once I left the cult at 26, I
Mm-hmm.
was fascinated about, I realized I didn't mention that. So I left the cult at 26, at 29, and moved away from the house I grew up in. And then at 29, kind of really started researching and figuring out who do I want to be in
Mm-hmm.
the world. And that kind of led to a decade long of um, research into leadership, into what is it to be an ethical human, what is relationship, what is healthy relationship, all of these questions that I wasn't allowed to ask when I was in those high control environments. And so my
Right.
work just naturally started leading me to where I
Mm-hmm.
am now because I started doing group coaching 6 or 7 years ago. I don't even know how many years ago now. Worked with 100 people in 2.5 years, but I was still showing up as an interior designer in the world. And eventually, what I recognized was I was using interior design as the medium for these conversations,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was really limiting. And I needed a larger medium. And so I went from being an interior designer who it designs physical space
Mm-hmm.
to interior designer that works helping people design their interior space.
Oh, I love that. I
Yeah,
love that. So
yeah,
touching.
yeah,
So very, yeah. Wow. Yeah. I like
yeah,
it because it's just, well, because it's so needed
yeah,
in the world that
yeah.
we live in today. It's very tough to exist today.
It is.
And
And I think
so,
it's really tough because most of us weren't taught what relationship is,
hmm
how to intentionally cultivate it in our lives. Most of us grew up thinking that relationship was more like proximity,
hmm
but it isn't.
hmm yeah.
Proximity does not equal relationship. Proximity does not equal expertise.
Yeah.
You need curiosity, respect, and accountability, which are the foundations of my work and what I
hmm
posit that all relationship requires, all ethical relationship requires.
hmm
And we need to understand those things and how to implement them and foster them intentionally in our lives
hmm
so that we can build actual relationship and have really beautiful, incredible, fulfilling lives. And when it comes to leadership, having a beautiful set of relationship between you and the people you lead and them having healthy relationships with one
hmm
another, that drives creativity, it drives innovation, it drives
hmm
profitability, right? So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
all relationship. And when we think about innovation, right, and creativity,
hmm
innovation is just a reimagining of relationship. It's
Yeah.
just us seeing the relationship between things in a new way, right?
hmm
So it all just keeps coming back to the same thing. It all comes
Yeah.
back to relationship.
Yeah. So Shana, with this process that you've gone through on your journey, how has it helped you as far as healing? How has it helped your healing process and also helped you to do what you're doing by forming a community, this healthy community around yourself?
Yeah. I truly believe that all real sustainable healing happens in community. I don't think it's really possible without it.
Hmm
Excuse me 1 second. I, because I know for myself, when I removed myself from unhealthy environments, there was an ability to take a breath and take a step back and survey, you know,
hmm hmm
but it wasn't until then I sought out and established healthy relationships. And that's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like
Right.
all of a sudden you realize, okay, these relationships are unhealthy. And then you're like, okay, I know what healthy is and I can build those. No, there's a big gap between there.
hmm
You don't even, you know how to identify what's not healthy, but you don't yet know how to seek out what is healthy.
Right. Right.
And that's the difference. That's for me, that's the journey of healing, right?
hmm hmm
Learning, right? And understanding what was unhealthy about previous relationships and how I can foster healthy
hmm
relationships in the future. That became a fundamental part of my healing because then I knew I could trust myself. Then I
Right.
knew I was safe with myself. Then I
hmm
knew I was picking people who I was safe with. And safe doesn't mean perfect.
Right.
Safe means people who are also invested in
hmm
curiosity, respect, and accountability. They understand that curiosity without respect is intrusive, and that respect without curiosity is uneducated, and that without accountability, it's unethical. Because if we're not interested in taking accountability for the impact of our actions
hmm
on the people who are being impacted, right?
hmm
Then it's unethical, it's exploitative, it's abusive, right?
Right. Hmm.
And so once we can establish and we can have that language and we can sit with, okay, that's what ethical relationship is. That's what I'm
Hmm.
seeking. These are the people invested in these things are people I'm safe with. Now healing can really start because we also have to be invested in those things so the people
Right.
around us, right, are
Yeah.
safe with us, right?
Yes. Hmm.
And that there's reciprocity in those relationships, right? There's
Hmm.
people who can hold us accountable and we hold ourselves accountable and we hold one another accountable. And there's this
Hmm.
beautiful cultivation of a life.
Right. Right. I love that.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about those who are entrusted in leadership. And this
Yeah.
is because leadership to me, because like in my everyday life, I'm a manager of people. I get to
Yeah.
lead people. And I always say to people when someone asks me about leadership, I'm like, it's one of the most important things you'll ever do
Yes.
as a leader. I said, because I'm entrusted, like I have been blessed to be entrusted with someone else's like life career path to help and guide them. So how can those entrusted in leadership positions become more intentional leaders?
Yeah. That's a great question. First, understand that leadership is a relationship, right? Second, understand you can't and will not know everything,
Hmm.
that there needs to be continual cultivation of relationship through communication with
Hmm.
the people that you lead. You cannot make assumptions about what they want, how they want to show up, because who they are today is not who they're going to be 3 months from now, who they're going to be 3 years from now. So there needs to be continuous feedback and a
Yes.
relationship cultivated so that trust, so that there's actual authentic sharing back and
Hmm.
forth, right? So for myself, I make a practice with everyone who I work with and who works with me that not only do we set up weekly conversations with one another, right? But at least once a week and at max minimum, well, not at max, at minimum, once a month, I ask them to clarify with me in what ways my leadership is either hindering them, causing them harm, making their job more difficult, so on and
Hmm.
so forth. I ask them to give me feedback and then we dialogue through, okay, I didn't realize that would cause you more work. How do you see, because you're the one it's hindering, how do you
Exactly.
see, right, that
Hmm.
I can help change that dynamic, that I can either stop hindering you, right?
Hmm.
Um, and actually benefit and support you. And oftentimes it takes less work on my part or a similar level of work. It just means changing the way I'm doing
Hmm.
something,
Hmm.
right? So it's not
Yeah.
difficult. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing is when we sit in true leadership, we recognize it's not about knowing. It's not
Hmm.
about being in charge. It's
Hmm.
about creating relationship and then it
Hmm.
transforms everything.
Okay, so a lots of good stuff there in what you just
Yeah.
said because I agree with you. Like I think it's really important. Like I always ask my team, like whenever we have one-on-ones, I'm like, what can I be doing better to, support you? Is there something, that you'd like for me to change in my
Yeah.
like my approach with you? Because I think, I always tell people, I'm like, you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
And you can't have one style of leadership does not work for everybody. You have to meet that person and to figure out like what are the levers for that person, like
Yeah.
what motivates them? How
Yeah.
can I meet them? And I think what is interesting, something you said that I think more leaders should pay attention to, it is like you cannot assume how someone wants to show up, how they want you to show up for them, because I just feel like so many times, like people do, managers do that, and then they do it, and then they're like, well, I mean, well, I just thought maybe like, I just thought that was like what you wanted. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, did you maybe ask me
Yeah.
first? And then I always try to tell people like the experience of someone and building trust with someone, it only matters about how the person perceives it. Like it
Mhm.
doesn't matter about me standing here saying, well, I mean, I have meetings with them every week and I
Right.
da 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 da. Like it
But
doesn't
if they
matter
don't trust you,
because
they haven't shared anything valuable with you.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the
And
only
and that
thing, oh, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and that trust can be established pretty simply by
Yeah,
radical accountability, right? And I
yeah.
talk about this in one of my keynotes. There are three things that I am deeply invested in when it comes to establishing respect and trust in a
Hmm.
relationship. And one is what happens, what is said between us stays between us unless I
Mm-hmm.
preempt the conversation with a
Mm-hmm.
request that it can be shared. Preempt,
Mm-hmm.
not at the end.
Right. Yeah.
Preempt, right? This comes to consent, right? I
Mm-hmm.
ask ahead of time if it's okay if I share it with specific people or share it however I'm intending on sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, or establish that it's not a private conversation,
Mm-hmm.
that it will
Yeah.
not be kept, right? Because sometimes it can't be. Sometimes it has to be shared with higher ups. But I think that it is necessary for us to say that,
Mm-hmm.
to establish that when this conversation is not between you and I'm going to tell you. And this also goes for our personal life. Whenever
Mm-hmm.
someone shares something with me, and so I practice all of these in my personal life, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what is the personal is the professional is the political, all the
Mm-hmm.
same, right? What we normalize in our personal life is what we normalize in our professional life is what we normalize in our culture overall and in our politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to establish and learn how to integrate consent into our everyday action. That's number one. Number two is that I establish, um, uh, like if I mess up, right? If I happen to
Mm-hmm.
share outside of school, then I
Mm-hmm.
clean up, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I come back to you and I say, you made me responsible for this piece of information and I wasn't careful with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I spoke outside of school. I shared it with someone I shouldn't. I didn't, uh, give you credit where credit was due, so on and so forth, right? So there's little ways that we can establish that.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we do that, right, when we take accountability, when we can sit back and say, I messed up in the small things, we start to establish that we can be trusted when we
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate that we're holding ourselves accountable. Now, that doesn't mean you can purposely violate someone's boundaries and then go back
Right.
and
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah.
That apologizing and accountability are two different things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Apologizing is often used as a tool to usurp our accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Accountability is taking responsibility for the impact of our actions. The key is taking responsibility for the
Mm-hmm.
impact, not our intention, but our actual impact. And then
Mm-hmm.
learning more and doing better and being committed to doing better moving forward, right? That's actual accountability.
Mm-hmm.
An apology is like, I'm sorry, my bad. And then we move on
Right. Yeah.
like nothing ever happened. That's
Yeah.
not accountability, right?
Yeah.
So
You're
when
probably
we
gonna do it again, just
A
FYI.
hundred
Yeah.
percent, they're going to do it again,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We let ourselves off the hook. We're going to do it again. So I think
Mm-hmm.
the key is establishing trust these ways becomes really, really powerful. And then we can feel more confident that people are going to feel confident to hold us accountable too
Mm-hmm.
and be able to trust us with more information.
Exactly. Yes. No, I really appreciate that because I just think, leadership is something that's super important to me. And I feel like a lot of people who are entrusted with it really just fall short a lot of times. And like you said,
Yeah.
it turns into these moments of just, I mean, the trust is not built and the trust
Right.
is never built because I mean, me even as a leader of people,
Yeah.
of course, I have a leader. So, if I
Yeah.
can't trust my leader and I don't have that relationship, it just breaks down, like everything breaks down.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are pulled into leadership positions without they or the leaders who pull them into the positions ever defining
Mhm.
what leadership should look like.
Yeah. Yep. And that is so true too, because
Yeah.
that is like improper, like there's no training, no
Yeah.
workshops, no nothing. You just have these
Yeah.
people who just by default became leadership. And
Yeah.
then you're sort of looking like I've always invested like in leadership and
Yeah.
workshops and things to
Yeah.
help me be a better leader. But I can see a lot of people like in my day to day where it's like, oh, they were just thrust into leadership and they don't really know how to be leaders.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
and it just really shows because so I'm glad that that is an area that people like you, someone like you is
Yeah.
working with
Thank you.
people because it's very like in being intentional and ethical in
Yes.
leadership is it's just so key.
It's so key. And I think there's a lot of organizations that maybe start off as small businesses or and grow to a
Hmm.
mid-size and they're able to handle things internally. It's like the same group of people and they know each other. And then things start kind
Yes.
of usually getting out of hand once you get above that mid-size, that larger mid
Yes.
to larger. And there's not infrastructure in place, and no one
Yes.
knows, and you're going at the speed of light, so no one really knows who to reach out to. They
Yep.
don't really know that there's problems with
Hmm.
that they need a structure for leadership,
Yeah.
that they need
Yep.
to give people specific tools, right?
Hmm.
Because just giving someone power over others is definitely
Yep.
not
No,
right.
no, no. I love that. Thank you so much for going into that a little bit more. So on the other side of it, right, we've got people in the everyday world who are
Yeah.
leading, managing people, but then we've got this other thing out there that's called the world we live in.
Yeah.
um, where we could use a lot of that
Yeah.
intentional ethical leadership training as well. But what do you wish the world would spend more time investing in, and how do you think it would change the world?
Curiosity. Always my answer will be curiosity,
Hmm.
because the beginning and the foundation of all relationship is curiosity. And again,
Hmm.
I will say that proximity is not relationship.
Hmm.
Proximity is not curiosity.
Hmm.
You moving closer to something might be driven by curiosity, maybe, right? But you have to actually get curious. You have to take the next step, which is to
Hmm.
learn more about that thing. And I foster this practice in my private life through what I call curiosity walks. And it sounds really trite, I know, but just go with me here. I go for a walk. Most of the time, it's outdoors. Um, and I will find something that I have quote unquote known about my whole life, and I will
Hmm.
learn three new facts about it. Now, I'm not Googling while I'm walking. Please don't do that. That's not safe. I wait until I get back home. I might snap a picture of it, or I might just take a
Hmm.
notes app, and I'm going to Google and learn at least three new things about that thing. And the key is that those three things are going to be things in ways it contributes to the world around it and the
Hmm.
ecosystems it exists within.
Hmm. Hmm.
So many of the things I've learned about are I learned more about butterflies and different types of flowers and different types of caterpillars. There was this
Hmm.
one caterpillar. I don't recommend touching the like fuzzy ones without knowing, because that one made my fingers go numb. But but I learned more about poison ivy. And poison ivy is fascinating. So are dandelions. Poison ivy is something where I live in South Jersey. It's like in the forests. It's in
Hmm.
the trees. It's everywhere, right? In the woods. And everybody wants to rip it out. But the thing is that it's a really important plant. It is a food source for deer and small animals, and becomes a house, like a place to live and shelter
Hmm.
for amphibians and small animals, like I guess chipmunks and those things, but specifically amphibians jumped out at me. In the fall, it grows berries and is an important food source
Wow.
for birds as they are migrating.
Hmm.
It also helps to filter runoff water and also helps to filter the air. So there are seeds that happen, that are cultivated in the plants of a field that don't
Hmm.
belong in the forest. They would destroy the forest floor. So the poison ivy along the edge of the forest keeps those seeds that are brought upon on the wind,
Hmm.
start floating on the wind. It keeps them from getting onto the forest floor and growing and destroying the forest, right? So it works as a filtering agent and a food source and a habitat, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there's all these cool things about it. I didn't even know it grew berries, by the way. I had no idea that
Me
there
either.
was berries on poison ivy, none whatsoever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started thinking about, why is this so important to leadership? Because a lot of times I hear leaders say things like, we're looking for somebody who's a good cultural fit.
Hmm.
Well, poison ivy is very uncomfortable for most human beings. It will give you a
Hmm.
rash, give you boil, gross. No one
Hmm.
wants that, right?
Right.
But but it appears that human beings are the only ones who are allergic to it. Everybody else seems to be, all other
Yeah.
life seems to be fine with it, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
it works as a protection for the forest and habitat. So if we think about leadership and we think, okay, what if I'm actually cultivating this as an ecosystem? And it doesn't matter if someone's a good cultural fit.
Hmm.
It matters if they can do their job well and they are desirous to contribute, right?
Hmm.
Poison ivy contributes a beautiful way to the forest. It may not
Right.
contribute to us as human beings, but it contributes to the ecosystems all
Hmm.
around us and benefits
Right.
us, because if the forests are destroyed by the fields of, the flowers of the fields and so on and so forth, then we don't have them, right?
Hmm.
So they do contribute to our lives, just not directly. So when we think about when we're hiring someone and maybe they just don't rub us the right way, they rub us the wrong way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe they're the poison ivy, but maybe they function as a protection agent. Maybe they're filtering out other things. Maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
they're fighting for this ecosystem
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I
Yeah.
just don't get along with them, and it doesn't really matter if I get along with them.
Right. Yeah.
It matters
Interesting.
that they're contributing, right?
That's a very, I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, that most places don't,
No.
because now it's become all about culture. And are they
Yeah.
a good culture fit? Will they fit in with
Yeah.
us? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I
Oh,
think because people are trying to fit someone into a narrow place,
hmm,
like we do as human beings about poison ivy. We're like, well, it gives us a rash, so
hmm,
like it, let's tear it out, right?
yeah. Yeah.
But we're trying to fit our narrow definition of how it gets to exist
Hmm.
onto it, rather than discovering in what ways it wants to exist and needs to exist in the world.
Right. Yes. No, I love that. All right, Shayna. So people might be listening now and they're like, I'm curious. I'm curious about working with
Yeah.
Shayna. Can you talk about the services you offer and
Yeah.
how the audience might work with you and connect to you?
Yeah, so we'll start with the easy one. The way you can connect with me is through email or through my website. So my email is Shana, Shana, at consonate.world. And my website is consonate.world. And I'm sure it'll be tagged in the show notes.
Mhm,
But consonate is spelled Concinnate. And I provide different tiers and ways of working with me. So for small business owners, sole entrepreneurs, I offer my workshops, and I'm condensing a couple more, so there'll be more offered soon. I offer my workshops in 45-minute segments through my website virtually, for $100. I'll accept my public speaking one. But that's a 2-hour workshop.
mhm,
So I offer them condensed down to make sure that the information is accessible,
mhm,
wherever you are at in your business. I also work consulting throughout the year with organizations, and do some one-on-one coaching as well. So all my services are listed on my website if you want to go check them out.
mhm.
Um, what's listed there is typically for corporations. So if you're just looking for, a month of sessions or something for some one-on-one coaching, definitely just reach.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I want to say thank you so much for spending time with the community today. This was a very enlightening conversation, and I think it's needed. And I think a lot of what you tackle is a lot of what people may not be ready to talk about, but I think it's definitely impactful and meaningful to us as human beings.
Yeah. I
So,
think people are ready. I think a lot of people are asking. They want to know. And I think it just
mhm.
takes a minute to process,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
big shift in the way that we think. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So, what we're going to do now, I'm going to transition to three things with Shayna. I'm going to ask you three questions that will help the audience get to know you even better.
Okay.
One is, how do you start and end the day?
I start the day with meditation, and snuggles with my dog. So he boops the door open, jumps on the bed, and we do our meditation. He gets belly scratches, I get meditation. And then definitely tea. I end the day typically with like some stretching and some water and
Mhm,
vitamins. I
mhm,
love making sure I take my vitamins. And what really helps me to sleep is magnesium. I'm not a huge fan of melatonin, but I do love magnesium. It's something we're deficient in and really has improved my sleep significantly. I highly recommend. It's a
mhm.
vitamin we're all deficient in.
Yes. All right. Number two, what's a goal or an intention you set for yourself this year?
Oh gosh, a big one is that for 2025, I would like to give 50 talks. So whether it be my workshops, my keynotes, I would like to be in front of audiences 50 times in 2025. We'll see.
Awesome.
That's the goal. Working towards it.
Yes. All right. And the last question is, where are you currently finding inspiration?
Oh my gosh, read a lot. So I have stacks of books everywhere. I'm currently reading Joyful Militancy, Building Thriving Resistance in Toxic Times.
Hmm.
And then I just bought and cannot wait to dive into Mutual Aid, building solidarity during this crisis and the next. And I'm also currently reading Trauma and Recovery by Judith L. Herman. Um, and then for fun, I also have a book club. I'm reading the book by, oh my gosh, I forget her name, but it's I'm Glad My Mom's Dead. It's about a Nickelodeon star and
Hmm.
her difficult um, moving through being a Disney child star.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, we love it, variety.
Yeah. Variety.
Um, so before I let you go, what are three things you'd like the audience to take away from our conversation today?
That the foundation of all relationship is requires curiosity, respect, and accountability. And I'd love people to just invest in getting more curious in whatever ways feels good and safe and right for you, right?
Mhm.
It could be like any number of things. It doesn't have to be a walk outside. It could be, asking yourself, could this furniture exist in this space in a different way? Could
Mhm.
I, I love this, I got this idea from Francesca Gino, the author. Could I put, make my milk pink for my cereal this morning or whatever it is, kind of
Mhm.
add nuance and add interesting interactions in your life and just kind of get curious about the ways that you can disrupt your normal
Mhm.
patterns and
Mhm.
see what opens up for you in your, creativity and your innovation in your life.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You can always come back here and chat with us in the future. But I definitely want to say thank you so much for your transparency and authenticity and sharing with the community today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned, everyone. Be right back.